You're late." The words hit before Sophie Bennett even fully steps through the swinging kitchen doors, her breath still uneven from the 3-block sprint in worn sneakers that have seen too many double shifts and not enough rest. The clock on the stainless steel wall flashing 7:30 p.m. in cold red digits. 90 minutes until a private event she knows nothing about, for guests she'll never meet again, in a kitchen that isn't hers. With a staff that's already decided she's going to fail, the air smells wrong. Not like preparation, but panic. Half-prepped vegetables drying at the edges, sauces broken, proteins missing, and every pair of eyes turns to her like she's either a miracle or a mistake. And honestly, she feels like both, her fingers tightening instinctively around the only thing she brought with her, a worn knife roll frayed at the edges, the zipper sticking halfway like it always does. Inside it, the one knife she trusts more than anything, the one her father handed her years ago in a cramped apartment kitchen where the stove barely worked, but the food always mattered. Menu's been changed twice. Someone mutters, not even looking at her. VIP guests, high expectations. Another adds, and Sophie swallows, forcing her voice steady, asking what's left, what's usable, what she's working with, because quitting isn't an option. Not tonight. Not when rent is overdue and this last-minute call was supposed to be her shot at proving she still belongs in a kitchen that doesn't look at her. Like she's temporary. And then she notices him, standing just off to the side, not in a chef's coat, not giving orders, just watching, sleeves rolled, posture relaxed like he has all the time in the world while hers is running out second by second, his voice calm when he finally speaks. "What would you cook if everything went wrong?" And she almost laughs because everything already has, but there's something in the way he asks that makes her answer anyway. Something honest, something real, something that still feeds people. She says, already moving, already pulling what she can salvage, already deciding that perfection is a luxury she can't afford tonight, but care isn't, never is. The chaos building louder around her as she sharpens the blade with a quick practiced motion. The steel catching the light for just a second before disappearing into motion, and somewhere behind her, unseen, that quiet man keeps watching, not like a critic, not like a customer, but like someone measuring something deeper than taste, something she doesn't realize yet is being tested. The knife moves before doubt can catch up, steel tapping rhythm against the cutting board in a steady, controlled rhythm that begins to quiet the noise around her, not because the chaos disappears, but because Sophie Bennett refuses to let it take over, her eyes scanning every inch of the kitchen like it is a puzzle she has to solve in under an hour, broken sauces becoming bases for something new, wilted herbs chopped fine enough to bring back life, and proteins that should have been the centerpiece now reimagined into something smaller but more intentional, something that tells a story instead of pretending everything is perfect. The staff watches her at first with skepticism, then with something softer, something closer to curiosity, because she does not yell, she does not blame, she simply works, assigning tasks in a voice that is calm but firm, like she has done this 100 times before, even if her hands are trembling just slightly beneath the surface. Across the room, the man in the rolled sleeves does not move, his gaze following every decision she makes, every adjustment, every moment she chooses people over pressure. And when one of the younger prep cooks drops a tray and freezes in panic, Sophie is the one who steps in, not with anger, but with quiet reassurance, helping him reset, giving him something simple to do so he does not feel like he has ruined everything. "You are losing time," the man says evenly, his voice cutting through the noise without raising it. And she glances at him for half a second, just enough to register that he is still watching, still measuring, before she answers without stopping her hands. "I know exactly how much time I have." And there is something in her tone that surprises even herself. A confidence built not from the situation, but from years of surviving worse ones. The clock ticks louder now, each minute slipping away as the dining room begins to fill, voices filtering in from beyond the doors, polished and distant, a different world entirely from the one she is fighting to hold together in here. And still she plates the first dish with care, not rushing, not cutting corners. Because if she is going to fail tonight, it will not be because she stopped caring. The man steps closer this time, close enough that she can feel his presence without looking. And when he speaks again, it is quieter, almost thoughtful. Why not serve the guests first and deal with the rest later? And she finally turns, just briefly, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that does not match the chaos around them. Because if the people back here fall apart, nothing out there matters. And for the first time, something shifts in his expression, something subtle but real, like he did not expect that answer, like he was waiting for a different one. The first plate leaves the kitchen, then another, each one carrying not just food but the proof that she is still standing, still choosing to show up fully even when no one promised it would pay off. And behind her, unseen by everyone else, the man in the rolled sleeves watches in silence, no longer just observing the food, but the person creating it, as if the real test was never about the event at all. The rhythm of the kitchen begins to change, not quieter but sharper, more focused, as if every movement now has a purpose that was missing before, plates sliding across stainless steel in a steady flow, while Sophie Bennett adjusts on instinct, her senses stretched thin but precise, tasting, correcting, building something that did not exist an hour ago. And just as it starts to feel like she might actually pull this off, the doors swing open harder than before, and a man in an expensive suit steps in without hesitation, his expression tight with impatience as he scans the room like he owns it, because in a way he probably does, his voice cutting through everything. Who is in charge here? And no one answers fast enough, so his gaze lands on Sophie, taking in her worn apron, her tied-back hair, the knife in her hand like it does not belong in a place like this. This is not what was approved, he says, gesturing toward a plated dish with barely concealed disappointment. Our guests expect consistency, not improvisation. And the room stills again, waiting, watching, because this is the moment where people either fold or fight back, and Sophie feels it, that familiar pressure in her chest, the one that says apologize, step back, do not risk it, but something steadier rises instead, something rooted deeper than fear. With respect, she says, her voice calm but clear. What was approved is no longer possible, but what is being served is still worth their time. And there is a pause, just long enough to feel dangerous, before the man scoffs lightly, shaking his head as if she has already proven his point. Confidence does not replace standards, he replies, turning slightly as if to leave. And from the corner of the room, the quiet observer finally steps forward, not rushed, not loud, but deliberate enough that the shift in energy is immediate, his voice even, almost casual. Then maybe the standard needs to catch up. And the suited man stops, turning back with a look that is less annoyed now and more curious, measuring, the two of them holding eye contact for a moment that feels longer than it should, before the suited man exhales and steps aside, not convinced but no longer blocking the path. And just like that, the tension breaks enough for the kitchen to breathe again. Sophie does not thank him, does not even look at him right away, because she does not know what just happened or why he stepped in, but she feels it, the shift, the permission to keep going, and she does, faster now, more certain, sending out plates that are no longer just solutions but statements, each one carrying the quiet defiance of someone who refused to disappear when it would have been easier to do so. And as the first real reactions start to come back from the dining room, not complaints but something closer to surprise, even approval, the staff begins to move differently around her, no longer hesitant but aligned. And in the middle of it all, she catches a glimpse of the man again, standing just within reach, watching not with distance anymore, but with something far more intentional, like he is no longer testing if she can survive this, but deciding what she is worth once she does. The plates keep moving, faster now, smoother, the kitchen no longer fighting itself but flowing as one. And Sophie Bennett feels it in the way her hands stop hesitating, in the way decisions come before doubt, like something inside her finally remembered who she is when no one else believes it. The heat from the stove pressing against her skin, the scent of seared herbs and citrus rising in the air, and beyond the doors, the sound of conversation shifts, no longer impatient but engaged, voices lowering not out of frustration but focus, the kind that comes when people are surprised in a way they did not expect. A server rushes back in, breath quick but smiling. They are asking what this is, she says, holding up an empty plate like it is proof of something bigger, and Sophie barely pauses, just nods once, already plating the next dish with care that looks effortless but costs everything. Because she knows this part matters more than the first impression, consistency, follow through. The quiet promise that what you give once you can give again. The man in the rolled sleeves steps closer again. Close enough now that she can hear him without the noise swallowing his words. You turned a disaster into something they are talking about, he says, not as praise, not quite, but as observation, and she exhales softly, not looking at him yet. It is still just food. She replies, even though she knows it is not tonight, not for her. And he watches her for a second longer, like he is weighing that answer against something only he understands. It is never just food, he says quietly. And for a moment she almost asks what he means, but another call pulls her back, another order, another plate, another chance to prove she can hold this together. Time keeps moving, the clock now reading 8:42 p.m., less than 20 minutes left in what should have been a failure. And instead the kitchen hums with something close to pride, staff moving with purpose, trusting her without needing to question every step. And Sophie feels it too, that dangerous edge of hope she tries not to lean into, because hope can disappear just as fast as it arrives, but still it lingers, steady and warm beneath the surface. Then the final course approaches, the one that usually defines the night, the one that guests remember, and she pauses just long enough to open her knife roll again, fingers brushing over the worn handle of her father's knife, grounding herself in something real, something that existed long before this moment and will exist after it. And she knows exactly what she is going to make, not something extravagant, not something meant to impress people who expect to be impressed, but something honest, something that carries intention in every detail, the kind of dish that does not shout for attention but earns it quietly. Across the room, the man watches her choose, watches the way she moves now with certainty instead of survival, and there is something different in his expression, something deeper than curiosity, like the answer he has been looking for is finally beginning to take shape. And as Sophie lifts the knife and begins, she does not realize that this next plate is not just the end of the night, but the moment everything shifts in a way she cannot yet see. The kitchen falls into a strange, fragile silence as Sophie Bennett begins the final dish, not because the noise disappears, but because something shifts in the air. Like everyone understands this is the moment that will define everything that came before it. Her hands steady now in a way they were not earlier, the knife gliding through fresh ingredients with precision that feels almost effortless, each movement controlled, intentional, like she is no longer reacting to chaos but shaping something that belongs entirely to her. She chooses simplicity, not because it is easy but because it demands honesty. A perfectly seared cut of protein balanced with bright citrus, a touch of herbs, a sauce reduced slowly until it carries depth without overpowering. Every element placed with care, not for show, but for meaning. And as she works, the memory of her father flickers quietly in the back of her mind, his voice reminding her that good food is not about impressing people. It is about feeding them something real, something they remember without knowing why. Across the room, the man in the rolled sleeves watches without interruption, his attention sharper now, no longer scanning but focused entirely on her, as if this single dish matters more than everything that came before it. And when she finishes plating, there is no dramatic flourish, no attempt to make it look like anything more than what it is, just a clean, balanced plate that carries the quiet confidence of someone who knows she gave everything she had. The server takes it carefully, almost reverently, and disappears through the doors into the dining room. And for the first time all night, Sophie allows herself to stop, just for a second, her breath catching as she leans lightly against the counter. The weight of the last 90 minutes settling into her shoulders, exhaustion mixing with something else she does not want to name yet. The seconds stretch longer than they should, the kitchen waiting in that uncertain space between effort and outcome, until the doors open again, slower this time, and the server steps back in, her expression different, not rushed, not stressed, but wide-eyed in a way that pulls every gaze toward her. They stood up, she says softly, almost like she does not fully believe it herself. The entire table, and a ripple moves through the room, disbelief. First, then something warmer, something closer to pride, and Sophie blinks, unsure how to process that, because standing ovations are not part of her world, not something she has ever expected or needed. Before she can respond, the man steps forward again, closer than ever, his presence no longer distant or observational, and when he speaks, his voice carries a weight that feels different from before. It is not the dish, he says quietly, and she looks at him now, really looks, confusion flickering across her face. Then what is it? She asks, and he holds her gaze for a moment, something unspoken passing between them before he answers. It is the reason you made it that way. And she does not fully understand what he means, not yet, but she feels it, the shift in the room. The way people are no longer looking at her like she is temporary, like she does not belong here. And somewhere just beyond the kitchen doors, the night is not ending the way anyone expected, especially not her, and especially not for the man who has been watching all along. Because this moment, quiet as it seems, is about to lead into something far bigger than either of them has said out loud. The applause does not reach the kitchen directly, but its echo lingers in the air, carried in the way the servers move differently now, in the way no one rushes past Sophie Bennett without a second glance. And for a brief moment, she allows herself to feel it, that quiet recognition she has been chasing for years without admitting it out loud. But it does not last long because reality has a way of returning quickly, and she straightens, wiping her hands on her apron, already preparing to leave. Before the night turns into something she cannot control. You are not staying. The man's voice comes again, calm but certain, and she pauses, glancing at him with a mixture of exhaustion and caution. I was not hired to stay, she replies, reaching for her knife roll, the familiar weight grounding her, reminding her of where she comes from and where she still stands, because moments like this do not usually change anything. They just feel like they might. He watches her carefully, as if measuring not her words but what sits beneath them. You think this ends when the plates are cleared, he says, and there is no judgment in his tone, just observation, and she hesitates for the first time, because part of her does think that, part of her has learned not to expect anything beyond the job itself. That is usually how it works, she answers quietly, and something almost imperceptible shifts in his expression, like he understands more than she expects him to, before either of them can say more. The doors open again, but this time it is different, slower, deliberate, and the same man in the tailored suit from earlier steps inside, no longer impatient but composed, his gaze moving past Sophie and landing directly on the man beside her. And the room seems to adjust instantly, the subtle hierarchy revealing itself in a way Sophie does not fully grasp yet. They are ready, the suited man says, his tone respectful now, not questioning. And Sophie feels it before she understands it, the shift in power that has nothing to do with titles spoken out loud. The man beside her nods once, then looks back at Sophie, and for a moment the noise fades again, the space narrowing to just the two of them. Come with me, he says simply, and she almost laughs at the absurdity of it, because she is standing in a borrowed kitchen with a borrowed opportunity, covered in the evidence of a night she barely held together. And now he is asking her to step into something she does not recognize, something she is not sure she belongs in. I am not part of this, she says, her voice steady but uncertain underneath, and he does not argue, does not push, he just holds her gaze a second longer. You already are, he replies, and there is something in the way he says it that makes it feel less like an invitation and more like a truth she is not caught up to yet. Around them, the staff begins to settle, the night winding down in a way that feels too sudden after everything that happened, and Sophie stands there for a second longer, caught between instinct and possibility, between the life she knows and something just out of reach. And as the man turns toward the dining room, expecting her to follow, she realizes that whatever waits on the other side of those doors is not just about the food anymore, and that walking away now might mean losing something she cannot replace once it is gone. The moment stretches longer than it should, the kitchen behind her fading into background noise as Sophie Bennett stands there with her knife roll still in her hand, the weight of it suddenly heavier than before, like it is anchoring her to the version of herself that knows exactly where she belongs and exactly where she does not. And yet her feet do not move back toward the exit like they usually would. They stay, rooted in a place that feels unfamiliar, uncertain, but impossible to ignore. The man does not repeat himself, does not rush her decision. He simply waits, already turned halfway toward the dining room, as if he knows she will follow even if she does not yet believe it. And that quiet certainty unsettles her more than pressure ever could, because pressure she knows how to fight. But this calm expectation, this belief without explanation, leaves her with nothing to push against. She exhales slowly, fingers tightening around the worn fabric before loosening again, and then, almost without fully deciding, she steps forward, one step, then another, crossing the invisible line between the kitchen and whatever waits beyond it. The doors open and the shift is immediate. The warmth of the dining room replacing the intensity of the kitchen, soft lighting reflecting off polished glass and silverware, conversations lowering as eyes turn toward them, not sharply, not rudely, but with a curiosity that makes Sophie suddenly aware of every detail she cannot hide. The flower still dusted faintly on her sleeve. The exhaustion she has not had time to mask. The fact that she does not look like she belongs in a room like this. And for a second, old instincts rise again, telling her to step back, to disappear before someone points it out. But the man keeps walking, unbothered, unhurried, and somehow that steadiness pulls her forward, placing her beside him rather than behind. And as they move deeper into the room, the subtle dynamics begin to reveal themselves in ways she cannot ignore. People greeting him not casually but with respect, conversations pausing just enough to acknowledge his presence, and it clicks, slowly at first, then all at once, that he is not just part of this event, he is the center of it. They stop near the head of the room where the same suited man from earlier now stands waiting, his posture straight, his tone measured as he leans in slightly. Everyone is asking about the chef, he says, and for a moment Sophie thinks he is addressing someone else, someone more fitting, someone who looks like they belong here, until the man beside her glances at her briefly before answering. Then they should meet her, and the simplicity of it catches her off guard. No build-up, no warning, just a shift that places her directly into the spotlight she has spent her entire career avoiding. The room quiets a little more, not completely, but enough that the attention becomes undeniable, and Sophie feels it. That sudden awareness of being seen not as background, not as temporary, but as the person responsible for everything they just experienced. And it is overwhelming in a way she cannot fully process, because recognition has always felt distant. Something meant for other people, not for someone who learned to work quietly and leave without expecting acknowledgement. The man turns slightly toward her then, his expression steady, not pushing, not rescuing, just present, as if reminding her without words that this moment is hers to accept or walk away from. And for the first time since she stepped into that kitchen, Sophie realizes that the real test was never about surviving the night. It was about whether she could stand still long enough to be seen when it mattered. For a moment, Sophie Bennett forgets how to breathe, the soft murmur of the room fading into a distant hum as every eye seems to settle on her at once, not with judgment, not with dismissal, but with something far more unsettling, expectation, and she stands there caught between instinct and reality, her mind racing to catch up with what is happening while her body remains still, anchored in place by a spotlight she never asked for, but somehow earned. The man beside her does not step forward to speak for her, does not soften the moment or redirect it. He simply allows the silence to stretch just enough for her to feel it fully, to decide what she will do with it. And that quiet choice matters more than anything he could say, because this is no longer about the kitchen, no longer about surviving a difficult night. It is about whether she can stand in front of people who see her and not shrink away. A guest near the front breaks the silence first, a woman with a composed smile and a glass still in her hand. That final course, she says, her voice calm but deliberate. What inspired it? And the question lands heavier than any criticism ever could, because it requires something Sophie is not used to giving. An answer that reveals more than technique or skill, something personal, something honest. Sophie swallows, her fingers tightening slightly around the knife roll she still holds, grounding herself in something familiar. And when she finally speaks, her voice is softer than she expects but steady enough to carry. It was not about impressing anyone, she says, pausing just long enough to feel the weight of her own words. It was about making something real with what was left. And there is a shift in the room, subtle but undeniable, like the answer reached further than the food itself. The woman nods slowly, her expression thoughtful now, and another voice joins in. Then another, questions not about perfection but about intention, about how she adapted, how she stayed calm, how she chose what mattered when everything was falling apart, and Sophie answers them one by one. Not perfectly, not with polished language, but with honesty. That does not try to hide where she comes from. And for the first time she realizes that the things she once saw as weaknesses, her lack of formal training, her unconventional path, her instinct to take care of people before presentation, are the very things that set her apart. Beside her, the man watches quietly, his gaze steady but different now, no longer evaluating, but recognizing. As if the person he was looking for has finally stepped into view, not because of what she created, but because of who she chose to be when it mattered most. The room continues to shift around her. Conversations picking up again, but now with a different energy, one that includes her rather than overlooking her, and Sophie feels it. That unfamiliar sense of belonging creeping in at the edges, fragile but real. And as she glances toward the man beside her, she notices something she did not see before, the way people subtly defer to him, the way his presence anchors the entire space, and the realization begins to form, slow but certain, that he is far more than he has allowed her to believe, and that whatever happens next will not be small, not temporary, but something that could change everything if she is willing to step fully into it. The questions begin to fade, not because people lose interest, but because something more important takes its place, a quiet understanding settling across the room as conversations shift from curiosity to recognition. And Sophie Bennett feels it in the way no one rushes her anymore, in the way their attention lingers not on what she did, but on who she is. And for the first time that night, she allows herself to stand without bracing for the moment it all disappears. Beside her, the man finally steps forward, not abruptly, not to take control, but with a presence that changes the room without effort, and the subtle shift in posture around him becomes impossible to ignore. The way conversations pause, the way people straighten slightly, the way even the most confident guests glance toward him with a level of awareness that Sophie now understands carries weight. "Everyone," the suited man announces gently, drawing the room's attention with practiced ease, "you have already experienced the work, but allow me to introduce the reason behind it." And there is a brief pause, just long enough for anticipation to settle, before he continues. "This evening was hosted by Daniel Hayes." And the name moves through the room like a quiet current, familiar to many, respected by all, and Sophie feels the realization hit her fully now, not as a guess or suspicion, but as certainty. The man who stood in the corner, who questioned her, who watched every decision she made without revealing himself, is not just part of this world, he is the one who shapes it. She turns to him instinctively, her expression shifting from confusion to something more complex, a mix of understanding and disbelief, and he meets her gaze without hesitation, no apology, no explanation, just a steady acknowledgement of what has been revealed, and in that silence, she feels something tighten in her chest, not anger exactly, but the weight of being seen and tested without knowing it. "You knew," she says, quietly, her voice low enough that it does not carry beyond them, and he nods once, not denying it, not softening it. "I needed to," he replies, just as quietly, and the simplicity of his answer leaves no room for misunderstanding, because this was never just an event, never just a dinner. It was something deliberate, something designed. Sophie looks away for a moment, the room around her continuing as if nothing has changed, but everything has, and she feels it in the space between them now, the difference between who she thought he was and who he actually is. And for a second she considers stepping back, returning to the version of the night where she was just the chef who came in, did the job, and left without questions. But that version is gone, replaced by something far more complicated, something that demands a choice she cannot ignore. Daniel watches her carefully, not trying to pull her closer, not trying to justify what he did, just waiting, the same way he has been all night. And she realizes that this moment, more than any other, is the real turning point, not the applause, not the recognition, but the truth laid out between them without disguise. And whether she walks away or steps forward will define everything that comes next. The room continues to move around them, soft conversations rising again, glasses clinking lightly. But for Sophie Bennett, everything narrows to the space between her and Daniel Hayes. The truth of who he is settling in with a weight that is both grounding and unsettling, because it reframes every moment of the night, every question he asked, every silence he held, every look that now feels less casual and more intentional. And she exhales slowly, steadying herself before she speaks again. So, this was all a test, she says, not accusing, not bitter, but clear enough that it cannot be ignored. And Daniel does not look away, does not pretend otherwise. No, he replies calmly. The situation was real, the outcome mattered, but how you handled it, that is what I needed to understand. And there is something in the way he says it that makes it feel less like manipulation and more like purpose. Though that does not make it simple. Sophie shakes her head slightly, not in disagreement, but in processing, her thoughts catching up to everything she just experienced. You could have just asked, she says quietly, and for the first time there is the faintest shift in his expression, something almost reflective. People answer differently when they know they are being evaluated. He responds, and she cannot argue with that, not after everything that just happened, because she knows she would have approached the night differently if she had known who he was, what was at stake, and somehow that realization both frustrates her and makes sense at the same time. Around them, a few guests continue to glance over, curious but respectful, sensing something important unfolding without fully hearing it. And Sophie feels that familiar instinct again, the urge to step away, to retreat back into the version of herself that does not stand in rooms like this having conversations that matter, but she does not move, not this time. Daniel studies her for a moment longer, then reaches into the inside pocket of his jacket, pulling out a simple card, not flashy, not exaggerated, just clean and precise, and he holds it out to her without forcing it into her hand, giving her the space to choose. I am opening a new concept, he says, his voice steady. Not another luxury restaurant. Something different, something that does not forget the people behind the kitchen. And her attention sharpens instantly, not because of the offer itself, but because of how he frames it. Because it sounds closer to the way she thinks than anything she has heard in places like this before. I do not need someone who can follow a perfect plan, he continues. I need someone who can build something real when there is no plan at all. And the words land deeper than she expects, echoing everything she just lived through, everything she has been forced to become over years of working in kitchens that never gave her room to fail safely. Sophie looks at the card but does not take it yet, her mind moving through possibilities she has trained herself not to trust. Because opportunities like this do not come without conditions, without expectations she may not be able to meet. And if I say no? She asks, her voice quiet but direct, and Daniel's answer comes without hesitation. Then nothing changes, except I will know I found the right person who chose her own path. And that answer, more than anything else, shifts something inside her, because it removes the pressure, the obligation, the sense that she is being pulled into something she did not choose. And for the first time since he revealed who he is, Sophie feels like she is standing on equal ground, not because of status or experience, but because the decision in front of her is entirely hers. And as she looks at the card again, the weight of the night settles into a single moment that will define what comes next. The card remains suspended between them for a moment that feels longer than it should, not because of hesitation alone, but because of everything it represents. And Sophie Bennett can feel the weight of that choice pressing quietly against her. Not urgent, not forced, but undeniable. Her fingers still wrapped around the familiar edge of her knife roll as if part of her is holding on to the life she understands while another part is being asked to step into something she cannot fully see yet. She looks up at Daniel Hayes again, searching his expression for something that might make the decision easier, a sign, a push, a reason to trust or to walk away. But he offers none, only that same steady presence he has carried all night. The kind that does not promise outcomes but respects whatever comes next. You make it sound simple, she says softly, not quite challenging him but not accepting it either, and he tilts his head slightly, considering her words before answering. It is not simple. It is just clear, and that distinction settles into her more deeply than she expects, because clarity is something she has rarely been given, especially in rooms like this where expectations are often hidden behind polished words and unspoken rules. Sophie exhales slowly, her gaze dropping to the card again. the clean lines of it almost too precise compared to everything she just went through, and she thinks about the kitchen, about the chaos, about the moment she chose to stay when walking. Away would have been easier, and she realizes that choice felt clear too, not easy, but certain in a way she could not ignore. Around them, the night begins to shift toward its close, guests rising gradually, conversations softening into farewells, but Sophie remains still, suspended in a moment that feels separate from everything else, because this decision is not about the event or the recognition or even Daniel himself. It is about whether she is willing to believe that what she did tonight can exist beyond a single evening. What happens if it fails? She asks finally, her voice quiet but steady, and this time there is no hesitation in his response. Then we learn what does not work and build again, he says, as if failure is not an ending but part of the process. And the simplicity of that perspective catches her off guard, because in her world failure has always come with consequences that do not allow for easy recovery. Sophie studies him for a moment longer, not the title he carries or the influence she now understands he holds, but the consistency in his words and actions, the way he did not intervene to make things easier for her, the way he allowed her to succeed or fail on her own terms. And something about that feels more real than any promise he could make. Her grip on the knife roll loosens slightly, and without rushing the moment, without turning it into something dramatic, she reaches out and takes the card from his hand, the contact brief but intentional, and she nods once, not as a final answer, but as an acknowledgement that she is willing to consider what he is offering. Daniel does not smile, does not celebrate the small shift. He simply nods back, as if this was never about convincing her, but about giving her the space to choose. And as Sophie looks down at the card again, the name printed clearly beneath his, she realizes that tonight did not just test her ability to cook under pressure. It tested whether she could recognize an opportunity that aligned with who she is rather than who she thought she had to be. And that realization lingers quietly as the night moves toward its end, leaving her standing at the edge of something that no longer feels impossible, just uncertain in a way that invites her forward instead of holding her back. The night begins to unwind around them in quiet layers, the kind that does not demand attention but signals an ending all the same. Guests stepping into their coats, conversations softening into final words and polite laughter, but Sophie Bennett stands still for a moment longer, the card now resting in her hand like something far more significant than it appears, her fingers tracing the edge unconsciously as if grounding herself in the reality of what just happened. Because a few hours ago she was just trying to survive another shift, and now she is standing in a room where people know her name, where someone like Daniel Hayes has offered her something that feels both unreal and entirely possible at the same time. She glances toward him again, half expecting him to have already moved on, to be surrounded by others pulling him back into his world, but he remains nearby, not distant, not distracted, just present in a way that still feels unexpected, as if the moment between them has not ended simply because the event has. You are still here, she says quietly, more to herself than to him, and he gives the smallest nod, his tone even. So are you. And there is something in that exchange that feels less like coincidence and more like a shared understanding, one that does not need to be explained out loud. Sophie shifts her weight slightly, her gaze drifting toward the kitchen doors in the distance, now closed, the chaos behind them already fading into memory, and she realizes that what happened in there will not stay contained to that space. It has already followed her out here, changed how she is being seen, how she is being considered, and more importantly, how she is beginning to see herself. I do not know if I fit into what you are building, she admits after a moment, her voice steady but honest, because that doubt has not disappeared just because she took the card. It still lingers, quiet but persistent, and Daniel does not dismiss it, does not rush to reassure her with empty confidence. He simply considers her words before responding. You are not supposed to fit into it, he says, his voice calm. You are supposed to shape it. And that difference lands deeper than anything else he has said, because it shifts the expectation entirely, from proving herself worthy of something that already exists to being part of creating something that has not been defined yet. Sophie looks at him again, really looks this time, not at the title or the position he holds, but at the consistency in the way he has approached everything tonight. The way he let her struggle without interference. The way he stepped in only when it mattered. The way he offered an opportunity without attaching control to it. And she realizes that this is not just about the offer itself. It is about the kind of space he is willing to create. One where she would not have to hide the parts of herself that do not fit traditional expectations. The last few guests begin to leave, the room growing quieter with each passing minute. And Sophie feels the moment narrowing again, not closing, but shifting into something more personal, something that exists beyond the structure of the event. She exhales slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just enough to let something else take its place, something that feels like possibility instead of pressure. And she nods once, more certain now than before, not because she has all the answers, but because she is no longer afraid of the questions. Daniel watches her carefully, recognizing the shift without needing it explained, and for the first time since the night began, there is the faintest hint of something softer in his expression, not triumph, not expectation, just acknowledgement, as if he understands that what she just accepted is not the offer itself, but the chance to step into something that will challenge everything she thought she knew about where she belongs. And as they stand there in the quiet aftermath of a night that changed more than either of them anticipated, Sophie realizes that walking away is no longer the easier option. It is simply the one that no longer feels right.